And then I just go, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am, as always, your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'm joined by my co-host, Brian McKinley. You want to introduce yourself, Brian?
Hello, Brian McKinley, author, vampire fanatic, godfather of vampire thrillers.
And we have a guest tonight who's new to the show, but hopefully this won't be his only appearance. And Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Johnathan Maberry. I'm a multi-genre writer. I write horror, science fiction, fantasy, thrillers, mysteries. I write comics for Marvel, IDW, and Dark Horse. I edit Weird Tales magazine. I had a vampire show on Netflix a couple of years ago called V Wars, and I also edit anthologies of all different types: horror, science fiction, multi-genre, and so on.
Fantastic. So just give me a moment. I'm posting the link to my Facebook, now the Paranormal Encyclopedia page, and the DVDR page so that people can find us. And then we are good to go.
Yeah.
This used to once about. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, I was just gonna tell Jonathan I've been meaning to check out V Wars just because the basic premise of it is so interesting and kind of different than what I've heard of and seen before. The only thing currently that I've read of yours was your Wolfman adaptation, which I believe you said in an interview was like your first actual bestseller.
Yeah, that was my first New York Times bestseller, and it was a lot of fun to do. It's funny, it happened because of Facebook. I had the flu, and for some reason when I had the flu, I do monster movie marathons. It's always been a thing with me, and I love werewolf movies. So I asked my friends on Facebook, "Are there any werewolf films you think I may not have seen?" And I've seen just about every werewolf film. And the next day, I get a phone call from the vice president of licensing at Universal Pictures saying, have you ever seen the movie The Wolfman? I'm like, is this a serious question? And so my assistant was following you on Facebook and heard you talking about werewolf movies. Did you know we're doing a remake? And I said, yes, I'd heard. And she said, well, would you like to write the novel? Because unlike Dracula and Frankenstein, there was never a Wolfman novel.
Exactly.
And I turfed her over to my agent. They worked out a deal, and I had exactly 5 weeks to write that novel. I had to research it and write it. And one of the things it's a funny thing, one of the things they don't tell you when you're doing this kind of work, which is called media tie-in work, you think you're going to watch the movie and then write a novel based on it.
Yeah.
But no, you actually do not ever get to see the movie until the book is out. So all I had to work with was David Self's original script, and they said, feel free to flesh it out. So I did. I did research, and I wrote a gothic novel about werewolves, and it wound up being a bestseller and launched my career and won a Scribe Award. And
it was quite good.
Oh, thank you. It's funny, much as I love David's script, the final cut of the movie bears very little resemblance to it. Wrote a beautiful.
Isn't that too often the case?
Yeah, very, very much the case. And the movie that came out was okay, but unfortunately, for the movie and for my relationship with Universal, the reviewer of the New York Times said, "Don't watch the movie, read the book."
Oh,
Sold copies of the book, but I haven't heard from Universal since. I'm just
exactly.
Oops.
I'm glad for you for the sake of the fact that you sold more copies of the book. That means more money. Now, I'm sad for you for the relationship.
Yeah, well, there's other companies out there. But circling back to V Wars for a second,
yes,
the show lasted one season. It launched at the beginning of COVID, and a play show launching at the beginning of COVID. We didn't intend it that way, but Netflix freaked out and said, "Oh my God, people are going to push back," and 27 million people watched it. It was huge. It was the number one show in 120 markets, and they still canceled it for one season.
Yeah, so Netflix seems to have a history now of just canceling stuff that becomes really popular. It's like they really don't seem to know what they're doing. They're operating on some weird model that nobody else understands.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some people try to copy their model of just buying a lot of stuff and then seeing what happens. Now they're all starting to cut back and cut their budgets and so on. HBO is basically it's a bloodbath over there.
Yeah.
But the books, I mean, there were 4 books and 3 runs of comics, and those are the real core of V Wars. So we are actually going to be going out shopping with the show. The rights are returning to me, and our star Ian Somerhalder, who was in Vampire Diaries, he and I are going to be going out shopping it to HBO and other places to see if we can find a new home where they'll let us do a grittier, darker version of it that hews a little closer to the books. Because the books are very dark.
I really hope you're successful with that.
With Ian spearheading it, he's a pretty popular guy, so I think we'll do well.
What's the basic premise, just for people that don't know?
So melting polar ice, and mind you, I came up with this idea back in 2010, so it's a while ago.
Yeah,
and this stuff is now all over the news, but back then it wasn't. But so in my story, melting polar ice releases diseases that are trapped in permafrost. And one of those diseases affects a gene, activates a dormant gene that codes for a series of physical symptoms that in the past were believed to be supernatural, vampirism. Blood, fangs, some facial changes, and so on. But the story was science fiction, not supernatural. It was completely science fiction take on it.
Right.
And one of the fun things we did, I had written several nonfiction books about vampires around the world and throughout history, and none of them really resemble the Hollywood version of the vampire.
Not exactly.
Abilities or anything else. So we played with that dynamic, and also we tackled issues of racism and intolerance and so on, political games playing, and basically a lot of what went on over the last 3 years in COVID is what was in our books back in 2011 and 12.
Nice.
Read the writing on the wall. And,
it's a little depressing just because,
it's a weird world out there, and unfortunately, a lot of what we put into our stories, those of us who we write something, we think about, we look at the world as it is, and we say, what's the worst that could happen? And since often we see in the direction things are going, it makes us look prophetic, but it's really just reading the writing on the wall. People are they love to push at anyone who's not them. The whole thing of making somebody else the other for whatever reason, whether it's race, politics, skin color, location, zip code, whatever. If it's not us, it's them, and we don't like them. And that was kind of one of the bases for the books.
Cool.
Those are just vampire fiction in general. I mean, Dracula as the Eastern European nobleman.
Yeah.
Coming in. The other is a huge topic there.
Yep. And also, vampires also have some other darker elements to it as well.
I'll work on it.
A lot of vampire fiction, a lot of vampire legends are really tied into, metaphors for rape and abuse.
Yeah.
And, seduction as something irresistible. And, the horrible consequences are because of a kind of a glamour that make the vampire appear irresistible. And, a lot of writers have tackled that. I went a different direction. I wanted to go more in terms of pop culture.
No, we're not getting. Apparently, we've got listeners who want to comment, and there's a problem with comments. So I've got a live chat going since we're on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
There we go. And now I can turn that back on. And if anybody is wanting to make a comment in the chat, it should be turned on now. I do apologize. I've been wondering why nobody's been commenting lately.
Ask Johnathan a question.
Yes. I know at least one friend of mine, James Dowart, wanted me to say hello.
Oh, cool. Tell him I said, hey.
I will. He's probably listening. He had mentioned he was going to try.
Oh, cool. It's one of the fun things about social media, and I love YouTube, is how nicely it allows us to communicate with one another. The world got a lot bigger and more interesting in some positive ways. I actually do like the social part of social media. Yeah. Like friends, like I might not have met you guys had it not been for this. And that's why this sort of thing is fun, because you find out there are like-minded people that you would absolutely get along with if you were in the same room, but you may not meet them because distance. And social media makes the world a little more like different rooms in the same house as opposed to separate, states or countries or whatever. And I've made some really good lasting friendships off social media. and
Yeah, I
my family
agree.
too.
The other side to that is social media has really been the main way that I've been able to stay in contact with like old friends
Oh
and
yeah,
family members that have like moved different places geographically or that I just don't happen to see
yeah,
in daily life anymore. I don't have reason to come across them. So our only interactions are over Facebook and
yeah. I mean, I moved from Philadelphia to Southern California about 9 years ago. I don't get back to Philadelphia very often, but between Zoom and StreamYard and Crowdcast and Facebook Live, there are so many ways in which we can essentially be in the same room at the same time. That's great.
No, it's amazing. I mean, like people I haven't talked to since high school or even further back.
Oh yeah. I think your mic.
oh
Your
yeah,
mic is off.
you're muted, Kevin.
Nope. Maybe you pulled the jack out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you
I
go.
can now. Yeah, there we go.
Okay,
back.
yeah, the jack must have gotten a little loose.
I thought you crossed over to the other side.
But no, people I haven't talked to since high school. Heck, I'm running a online role playing game on Tuesday nights that I'm putting up on my other YouTube channel, and one of the guys there is an old college buddy of mine.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah, I've run into some old friends and also made some interesting new friends. People who just reach out for whatever reason to say hi or start a conversation. Often it's because of the stuff I do, but sometimes it's because I'm talking about something online and they like that same topic, and they just want to have that conversation, and it's great. It's really great.
Oh, definitely. The YouTube channel grew out of doing the radio show and want to come back to it, and then I tried to figure out how to go back on radio for years, and then it's like, do a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And the people I've
YouTube is
met,
kind of the new radio.
Yeah, I don't even know. I wouldn't even know how to find a radio other than like Spotify or Pandora, and they're like not true radio stations,
Oh, I still listen to regular radio in my car when I drive around. I have my local Philly WMMR that I listen to.
Oh, so you're Philly then?
Oh well, Jersey.
Okay.
I'm in the Princeton area now,
Oh, well.
but we still get the radio stations and stuff from the
Cool.
Philly area.
And I was a WMMR fan for a long, long time before I moved.
Yeah,
But,
it's a great station.
Yeah, now when I'm driving, it's all audiobooks.
Yeah, same actually. I listen to music from time to time, and it's like I've never been a music guy that much, so I just listen to audio at this point.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm right now listening to one of my own audiobooks, which not all writers do, but if you're writing a series, it's really easy to kind of get back into the flavor of it. And my audiobook reader, Ray Porter, is freaking amazing. I mean,
I did do that once. I listened to my own audiobook. Doesn't it? Don't you find that it changes in a way?
Sure.
The way you think about your writing, because like you get used to reading it off the page, but then hearing somebody else read it word for word, you suddenly realize like, oh, do I do sentences like that? That's
it's
an odd brain that I have, don't I? You notice things.
It's great for analyzing your writing, but also you hear what things that you want to change. You hear things that you did well, but also the performance. Like my guy Ray Porter, we've done, I don't know, 25, 30 books now, between short story collections, novels, and other things. But he's a trained character actor. He was in Sons of Anarchy. He was in Justified. He was, if you saw the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League, he was Darkseid.
Oh wow!
He's been in a ton of stuff, but he, as a character actor, he kind of submerges into the role, so he is not as famous as some of the characters he's played. Yeah. But his audiobook work is superb. He was audiobook of the year last year for Andy Weir's Hail Mary project, and but we do a lot of stuff, and he changed the way in which, like, he gave accents to the characters, and now I hear those versions of the characters in my head when I'm writing. So I write to Ray's narration. So we have a nice working partnership. and we've become very good friends.
My audio book narrator was a guy named Brian Rollins, also a very talented voice actor.
Yeah.
He also gave accents to my various different vampire characters to differentiate them from each other.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, like, I'm listening and I'm like, I was like, is that what Julia would sound like? It's actually kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Never thought of that. I always pictured this actress in my head or whatever, or whatever. So yeah, but hearing him, it was like, no, that actually probably makes more sense, like, historically.
And when you move into things like television and film, again, you're going to have actors embodying your characters.
Yeah.
And like when they cast Ian Somerhalder as Luther Swan in V Wars, and some of the other actors who are now in a number of shows. Adrian Brody's in the new Prince of Bel-Air show, and Michael Grey Eyes was on True Blood and a bunch of other or not True Blood, True Detective and many other things. Laura Vandervoort, who's been in a ton of stuff. Yeah. So having them play characters from my books is a little surreal. We were sitting at the first table read I had ever been to. All these actors I've seen in a million shows are sitting there being my characters. It was surreal, but their version of the character kind of stuck with me as that's the version of the character, and I like that. It makes the characters, it gives the characters more of a reality because it separates them from just my version, and it gives them a new voice, a new personality, and so on, and it makes them come alive. And I'm a big fan.
Which is cool, because a lot of times you hear so often about authors that, like, can't stand adaptations of their work because they feel that the people got it all wrong.
Yeah, they should
they pick the wrong actors. Or
I hate that. I hate when writers say that. I mean, your version, our version, the writer's version exists. It's never going to change. That it's written to be read. Performance is something else. There's always going to be interpretation. Like, Shakespeare's had how many people play Hamlet? They've all been different. So, but it doesn't make one wrong or another right. It means that the work itself lends itself to interpretation. And that interpretation enriches and enlarges the world that you created for your book. If somebody watches it and doesn't like the actor or the character, they can always read your book. Or if they do, they can read your book. In either case, your book's still there.
Yeah.
But I have this thing about writers who say they don't like listening to their audiobooks. Well, first off, the audiobook's a big part of your income stream, so get over yourself. Second, there are people who don't have the time to sit and read a book. They truck drivers or people who have long commutes or whatever.
Yeah. Audio
is sometimes the only way they're going to read for pleasure. So why spoil that experience by saying that you don't like it as the creator saying you don't like it? That, to me, that feels cheap. It's small-minded. I'm not a fan. And I don't want to get off more of a rant, but just say, kiss my ass. Leave it
there. So, Kevin, did you want to ask Johnathan? There's a question I'm waiting for you to ask because,
I'm open to anything you guys want to ask, or somebody who's posting in the chat, which I can't see. So,
is my fiance just confirming that I finally fixed the problem with the chat.
Oh,
cool.
Well, I have to say, I'm absolutely just fascinated listening right now. It's one of the things I love about having guests on is I can just sit back and listen and learn and take in different perspectives. I certainly agree with you as somebody who reads a lot, and I also do a lot of audiobooks just because I work in security. I sit in a guard shack all day.
Exactly.
It's easier to listen to audiobooks sometimes. It's a different experience to listen to it and to read it because I have plenty of books I've read and I've listened to it as well. But yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think you're right. It's like, guys, get over yourselves. They're giving you money. Take the money and be thankful.
It's another income stream that wasn't there for writers, a while ago. And also, there are a lot of kids who have reading issues. So putting young adult or middle grade or young adult books on audio, they can actually sit there with the print version, hear the audio, and understand how words are pronounced.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
It's a great tool to help reluctant readers learn to read. And my Rotten Ruin series won a lot of awards for reluctant readers. And I've heard from so many kids that helped them fall in love with reading or help them understand what they were reading. And that's one of those things you don't know about going into writing, but when you realize that some crazy story that started in your head that is some kids reading actually helped cultivate a love of reading in general, that's awesome. That's incredibly awesome. I've had tears in my eyes hearing some of those stories, but I've also had educators say what a useful tool it is. Just like comic books, people used to put comic books down all the time. Hell, I learned to read more from comics than anything else when I was a kid. The images compelled me enough to pay attention to the story, and to the dialogue, and it encouraged me to want to read more beyond the comics, and that got me into reading tons of stuff. In fact, I'm going to tilt my camera for it. The book right above me there, the Conan the Wanderer, over my shoulder, that is the very first book I ever bought. And
wow.
When I was a kid, but I was reading comics, and I was reading some of the old comics dealing with swordsmen and monsters and stuff, and that made me want to pick up that book. And I've read a lot since then. So anything that gets someone to read or to hear a story, which is a kind of reading, I'm all for.
Absolutely.
Well, not just that, I'd point out reading the story is a fairly modern idea of how to interact with stories. For most of human history, it's been word of mouth. It's been the storyteller.
Yeah.
And audiobooks kind of almost have an element of that I love the written word. I'm not going to disrespect it. But I like seeing, as an amateur storyteller myself, I like seeing that come back.
Yeah, audible storytelling, spoken word storytelling predates written language by thousands and thousands of years. I mean, it's how fundamentally cultures began, by sharing stories about the hunt, or something they saw or whatever. That began the first stories, and embellishment made them a little more entertaining. I didn't just see a saber-toothed cat; I was chased by one. You embellish the story to make it more fun, but you get the point across, and the people listening to it learn and share and so on. You meet other tribes and cultures, you share, and I mean, it's fundamental to us. We are storytelling species.
Yes. I think it's one of the things. I'm not sure it's the only thing, and I'm not sure the only species. You have to wonder sometimes with more advanced, even primates, for example. But I think it's one of the things that makes us important is our ability to tell story.
Yeah, and I mean, to a degree, animals must do it because there's learned behavior, pack behavior, whatever behavior, and there are also animals that have the sense of play. Well, if there's learned behavior in play, somehow it's been imparted, whether through bark signals, body language, whatever.
Yeah.
The value of play, the value of doing this in a hunt, the value of doing that, and that is its own kind of storytelling. So and shifting a little bit to a different type of storytelling. One of the things that drove me into the direction, or pushed me in the direction of wanting to tell spooky stories, my grandmother, if you can imagine Luna Lovegood from the Harry Potter movies as an old lady, that was her. She believed in everything, vampires, witches, the whole bit, and taught me to read tarot cards when I was a kid. But her house was floor to ceiling with books. Most of them were either collections of old tales, folk tales, and so on. But a lot of them were the archaeology and the anthropology. Even though she believed in stuff, she also looked for the things which people believe that weren't supernatural. She actually did have a dividing line, like sudden infant death syndrome being one of the things that led people to believe in invisible vampire spirits. Kid goes to bed healthy, dies. There's no marks or anything. The people, the parents, can't believe that it just died. They can't believe that God would take the life of a innocent infant. So there must be a monster or a devil or something, and they tell
Lilith, various vampires,
Lilith, the hag, all sorts of variations.
Mm-hmm.
And believing that there is a monster is actually, in a way, was good for them, because they would go to the village priest or whoever, which shaman, whatever culture it was, and that person would say this prayer, put this talisman up, or put garlic around the windows, or whatever they would say to do. And since sudden infant death syndrome rarely hit the same family twice, it reinforced that now there's the new children are protected. So it balanced out. If there was God, there's anti-God, but believing in God gave you strength against the whatever the anti-God was. It actually worked really well, for getting people to feel that the universe had some balance to it. But so
Well,
she would tell
Teresa,
me all these stories. It was wonderful. It encouraged my interest in what she called the larger world, and certainly when I became a fiction guy in 2006, most of my fiction has dealt with supernatural or science things that are so weird that they appear to be supernatural.
I'm actually quite happy. One of our regular listeners, Teresa Hall, has shown up. And welcome, Teresa. It's good to see you.
Hello, Teresa.
I'm glad I got chat working, for heaven's sakes. I'm just curious. Um, I definitely see what you mean with the hags and sudden child infant death syndrome, which is of course horrific. I'm curious, have you ever heard of sudden unexplained death syndrome?
No, but I can see what it might be. Somebody
It's
dying
what
from. Okay, please.
it's pretty much what you're thinking. It's the adult version of SIDS.
No, interesting.
What's particularly fascinating about it, and it's one of those places where folklore and medicine intersect,
Mm-hmm.
is it's pretty much unique to men in their 20s from Southeast Asia.
Interesting.
Medi- just like with SIDS, although we're getting closer with SIDS, there's no medical explanation for it. They just die in their sleep.
This is what inspired Wes Craven to do Nightmare on Elm Street, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yeah.
It gives
Yeah.
me something else to dive into then.
Yeah, I
That's
remember
one of the
hearing about
reasons I love this whole field. No matter how much
Mhm.
there's always something cool and new.
it.
Now,
Yeah.
mind you, less cool for people who
No.
are dying, but for those of us who like this sort of thing, that's pretty fascinating.
So in South Vietnam, there's a culture called the Hmong.
Right.
They are a shamanistic Buddhist culture, generally considered by shamans around the world, as I understand it, the most powerful of the shaman
Okay.
groups in the world. But the problem they have is the Vietnam War happens. The U.S. moves these people out of Vietnam because as they lose the war,
Mm-hmm.
and in Hmong culture, there's a type of evil spirit called the Dab Sog. Dab Sogs are hags. They they live under the ground. They come out at night. They sit on men's chests and they choke the life out of them.
Mm-hmm.
In the Hmong culture, there are rituals you can do to keep a Dab Sog at bay, but they have to be done at specific holy sites. Move them out of Vietnam, they no longer have access to the holy sites.
Yeah. It's interesting because that uh, variation on night terrors, night sleep paralysis, that shows up in a lot of different cultures because it's actually a medical phenomenon. Doesn't usually lead to death. That's interesting that in that culture there are more deaths associated with it. So that's something I want to look into for possible fiction. Because anytime I hear something like that, I know there's a story to be told. And even if somebody has told the story, there's a different version of the story or a different entry point. Like there's a million versions of ghost stories or vampire stories. Those sorts of things are utterly fascinating.
So, Jonathan, I have one question. Here's the question that I kind of thought that Kevin might eventually ask you, or seems like the question that he should ask you, which is: have you ever yourself had any kind of a paranormal experience that might have helped spur your imagination or gotten you interested in anything? Like, have you ever seen a ghost or anything like that?
I have not seen a ghost. I would love to, but I have had an experience. It was two related experiences that are tied to my grandmother and make me believe that it is more than just coincidence. I'll give you the short version. Now, my grandmother used to have a lot of among her various hobbies and so on. People would bring in injured birds to her, and she would nurse them back to health. Not just parakeets. We're talking about like crows and eagles and stuff. Pennsylvania.
Oh wow!
Just whatever was injured. We're talking the middle to late 1960s and early 70s. Leading up to when she died. She was very old. when she died. But so she always said that she would look out for me. I had a very troubled childhood. She always said she would look out for me. And then she passed. Two different things. First, I'm driving through the Lehigh Tunnel in Pennsylvania. Now, when you get out of the tunnel, it's mountains on one side, a drop off on the other, and 70 miles an hour. And I'm tooling along through it, and my old Chevy Impala, and a bald eagle comes flying right across the road, like 6 feet over the road. Very unusual.
Oh, wow.
And this is one of the birds. She had nursed a bald eagle. The only other up until that point, the only bald eagle I'd ever seen was the one in my grandmother's house and the one in the zoo. So here's one flying right across the road, and I would have hit it. So I hit the brakes to keep from hitting it. And I was fast, and I slowed down. And just when I got to about 10 miles an hour, my wheel broke off. Actually broke off.
Oh,
right?
geez.
The whole thing broke off.
Wow.
So I just gently skidded to the side, and I was fine. Called AAA. And while I'm there, eagles are circling me the whole time. Right now, had I been going full speed at 70 miles an hour and wheel broke off, we would not be having this conversation unless you guys were doing a seance. So, one time, okay, a lot of birds in Pennsylvania. I was edging away from eastern into central Pennsylvania where there are a lot of bald eagles. So, okay, maybe that was just a thing, And then 10 years later, I'm going up on Route 32 up to Easton. Now, once you get halfway up there, again, you have a winding road, mountain on one side, drop off on the other, speed limit of 55 miles an hour, which is way too fast for that road.
Yeah.
And I'm tooling along again. I got Tom Waits on the radio. I'm heading up to a book signing, and as I'm driving along, a red-tailed hawk flies right in front of my car, so low that its wing brushes my hood. Again, I hit the brakes, skid around the corners, a 5-car pileup. I would have hit at full speed.
God.
Now, twice, birds of the type that she nursed back to health saved my life. Now, I understand there's a lot of birds in Pennsylvania and so on. I don't know anyone who has had an experience like that twice.
Aren't they both on the endangered list for that matter?
I think so, yeah.
But bald eagles, certainly.
Yeah. But the point is, these are birds of the exact type my grandmother had nursed back to health. And she was born on Halloween. She was a very spooky lady, loved her pieces. And, as soon as both incidents happened, I remember her saying, "I'll always look out for you." And I, to this day, I'm a very skeptical guy. I'm not a disbeliever, but I'm somewhere between Mulder and Scully. I'm skeptical, but I really want to believe.
Yeah.
And those two incidents happened, and you would have to go a long way to prove to me that is not my grandmother reaching out to me.
So our regular listener commented. First comment was during the first story, which is that is a message, or was a message. And the second is that's beautiful. She's watching out for you.
Yep.
Over you. And I 100% agree. You've had a paranormal experience.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah. And I had another one that I'm not sure was paranormal. Probably was, but it was just weird. A couple of friends of mine and I were going around with a woman we knew who was house hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, we happened to live in the neighborhoods. We knew the area better. Her name was Honor. First name was Honor. And, this one house was kind of cool, kind of weird. It had a kind of a weird vibe, but I like weird vibes. I even feel weird vibes probably because I want to rather than more than there actually being them. But we went down the cellar to see what the cellar was like. And on the wall is etched in the wall, Honor, her first name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know how that came to be on the wall, but the odds on someone named Honor with friends who all three of us were feeling there was something creepy about the house, go down the cellar and the word Honor is on the wall. It's one of those things where, like, I don't care. This is Honor talking. I don't care what this house costs. I'm not buying it. I'm leaving right now. And there was like a cloud where she used to be that dissipated and she was gone. And my buddy and I were like, well, hey, look at my wrist. Let's go. And we got the hell out of it. It's just weird. So I've been on the fringes of some stuff, Definitely been on the fringes of stuff. I'm very open-minded about it.
That's good. I don't think that one's particularly, Honor isn't, it's somewhat unusual as a name, but it's not like a word that isn't used very often.
Yeah, so why would somebody scratch it on the wall?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it could be complete coincidence and one of those things. Because I've had weird coincidences. My wife and I have all these weird coincidences with our families. Like we found out through accident that my great-grandfather captured her great-grandfather at the Battle of Gettysburg.
That's nuts.
Yeah, and I didn't know my great-grandfather had done anything of note because my father was an asshole and his father was an asshole. So I figured my great-grandfather was probably one too.
It's
Turned
a
out
family tradition.
the original Medal of Honor winner at Battle of Gettysburg,
Oh,
captured
wow.
the Southern flag, and the flag bearer was my wife's great-grandfather. And also the fact that one of my childhood mentors was the fantasy writer Elsbreg de Camp, who did a lot of the Conan novels, including that one that was behind me on the shelf. Turns out he was her unofficial uncle because he was her grandfather's best friend.
Oh, wow.
Her grandfather was a literary agent who represented, among other people, Ray Bradbury, Robert Bloch, and a lot of the people who actually wrote for Weird Tales. Two things about that. Bradbury was also one of my mentors, introduced to me by a teacher, a librarian, who mentored me for 3 years. And also, I'm now the editor of Weird Tales. So all these weird coincidences happen. Now, those feel like coincidences. Honor, less so. That feels just weird.
I don't know. The honor one, I mean, there's the skeptic in me, and just weird coincidences happen. Yeah. I mean, if you want to look at just how goofy things are in the world, and this isn't just for you, but for listeners, sometimes Google weird correlations.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is that there's you can draw a correlation between the awarding of higher degree, like master's degrees and PhDs in mathematics, and deaths by drowning, strangulation, and other forms of asphyxiation.
Interesting.
Doesn't mean anything, I don't think.
Right, yeah. Like the Kennedy and Lincoln thing with, Kennedy's secretary was Lincoln, Lincoln's secretary was... There's all sorts of weird connections.
Yeah, actually, I found out most of that is bullshit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is made up.
Like Lincoln, I should say we need to watch
Lincoln's
language because
YouTube's Kennedy and Kennedy's secretary was...
that bums me out. That's not true. But hey, I'm glad I know that it's not true, but it still bums me out.
Yeah,
there are still some weird coincidences between the two. The other side of which is, if you pick almost any two presidents, with a decent amount of time between them, you'll find weird coincidences.
Yeah, and you can do that with a lot of people too. If you dig hard enough. The stuff between my wife and I was just weird. I mean, like really.
No,
weird.
The Gettysburg thing is like, levels. What the heck?
Yeah, that's generally cool.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, the honor thing. Maybe there's a meaning to it. Maybe it's a really weird coincidence.
And nobody will ever find out. So it just remains. And this was 40 years ago. So, it's stuck in my mind all this time. But at the same time, if there was a normal explanation, none of us would ever find that explanation out. So we can enjoy the weird memory of it and the what if of it. And that's what it is,
and people can make ghost stories out of it, certainly.
The two birds, though, I'm convinced that was my grandmother.
I'm 100% certain you're right. It was your grandmother.
Yeah. But as far as ghosts go, I would love to see a ghost. I'm
hang out with Kevin sometime. He'll take you to a graveyard.
Come back to this side of the country. I'll take you on a ghost hunt.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of graveyards. I've been on ghost watches, ghost hunts, ghost tours. I haven't seen anything yet.
But I'll take you to the places the ghost tours don't go.
Well, that would be cool. Next time out east, I'll drop you a line.
I'll see what we can do. Because the thing I'll tell you. Yeah, Brian's not too far from me, so it'll be a get together.
Cool.
I'll tell you from experience.
I have no interest in seeing a ghost, however.
Although I've dragged you along once or twice.
I'm happy, to believe / kind of not believe, and leave it up to interpretation. I don't want to actually see one.
Yeah, and there are plenty of supernatural things I just don't buy. Like I vampires, werewolves, I love them. I've written tons about them in fiction, nonfiction. Do not believe in them, but they're cool as hell. And a lot of the other folkloric stuff. Red caps and hinky punks and unicorns and stuff. Some of it's bad reportage. Somebody sees a rhinoceros and they want to embellish the story, and drunken seaman sees a dugong or something else out there in the water, and
There's a funny thing there, actually.
about mermaids.
Yes. Um, yes, there's a natural explanation for mermaids. No, it's not dugongs or manatees. That's
What's your theory on it then?
okay. So the one story that it makes sense that was a manatee is a story that was related by Christopher Columbus's navigator. Brian, can you turn off your phone or at least mute yourself?
Yeah,
Where he saw
perfect timing.
where Columbus saw what he called the manatee near Haiti
Mm-hmm.
and remarked that it was a little more masculine looking than he expected. That was almost certainly a manatee. But the thing is, most mermaid folklore comes from Scandinavian cultures and Mesopotamia. Neither are areas where you find a lot of manatees.
No, but you have mermaid and mermaid type legends in dozens of countries, though.
This is true,
Yeah,
but there's an explanation.
including Greece.
If you're on the deck of a sailing ship, particularly a deck of the sailing ship that's close to or even below the water level, like a Viking longship, where you
Mm-hmm.
actually are
Right.
standing a little below the level of water, and there's a storm brewing. Sometimes it will create an optical illusion that can distort objects in the water and make them look almost human-like.
Sure, and in certain areas, certain situations of light refraction, it could be reflections of somebody on the ship itself.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
distorted. But the thing is, there are a lot of potential logical explanations for a lot of these things, and that's it's kind of there are more potential explanations than there are potential proofs that the
True,
supernatural exists, and
but
that
the
makes it a
argument
little hard, a little harder for people to suspend their disbelief.
the argument I would make with mermaids is this explanation works pretty well because the other thing to keep in mind is to see a mermaid or particularly to hear one sing is a sign a storm's coming. And if you're on a sailing ship in or just before a big storm, the wind will whip through the sails in a
Yep.
way that can almost sound musical.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm well aware of that phenomenon as well. The wind in the riggings.
Yeah.
There's even been poems about the songs of the riggings.
Mhm.
Some of the old sea
But
shanties.
like all of that fits the mermaid phenomenon better than manatees that aren't particularly
Better
musical.
than, but manatees and other things, even
Yeah.
seals, play their role in the overall scope of this as a common phenomenon among people of the sea seeing things.
Yeah.
And also, when you look at something like, say, the British Navy, they drank beer and got rum every day. So they
Yep.
were hitting the ass all day long every day. So there's a lot of things that we're probably seeing that weren't
Aren't
necessarily
real.
there. Yeah.
And then
And,
again,
and don't even get me started on the effect of mold on their bread and some of the ergot, which had the dancing sickness and other things related to it. I just wrote a whole novel about weaponized ergot, which will
interesting.
be out in August.
I mean, obviously, researching the witch trials, I've been looking a little bit into the ergot poisoning because it's a popular theory, in my opinion, not accurate for why the kids acted bizarrely.
There are two types of ergot poisoning. There's gangrenous ergot and there's convulsive. So it almost certainly convulsive ergot from mold on rye. They've done enough studies in enough areas where that's happened to pretty much lay that one. And one of the fun things is I work with scientists when I'm doing my research for fiction. So a buddy of mine's a molecular biologist, and he gave me the nice hard science behind it. It's pretty incontrovertible, which makes it good for me in terms of fiction, because then I have a hard, solid platform of nonfiction from which I can then expand into the fiction and distort reality to suit my plot. And also, by the way, for fun, I had them add psilocybin to that bioweapon. So not only were people going crazy, they were tripping balls the whole time. So it made it a really funny bioweapon to launch. Everybody's found.
I should clarify. I mean, there's no question ergot poisoning can cause convulsions and hallucinations, and I need to do more research into this before I read the book, obviously. But as I understand it, the symptoms of ergot poisoning don't line up real well, specifically with the kids, with the teenagers, in fact, in Salem.
Well, I don't know about the ones in Salem, but I'm talking about the ones all through Europe. There are dozens of cases all through Europe: the dancing sickness, the collapsing bridge.
Well, yeah.
Tons of them. In
Oh
Salem,
no, there's plenty it does involve.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not an explanation. Although, funny enough, a big part of what European witch trials had to do with is climate change. If you look at when the witch trials in Europe specifically kick into high gear, it's around after the 13th century, particularly the 14th and 15th. Starting in the 13th century and ending in the 18th or 19th, Europe went into what's called the Little Ice Age.
Little Ice Age, right? Yeah.
Now, what happens is crops fail. Normally placid, normally non-problematic wild animals start to go a little crazy. Domesticated animals start dying. And throughout Europe, the idea had always been the health of your land is tied to the king. If the king is pleasing God, the land will flourish.
Right.
If God is angry at the king, the land will fail. So all these problems start to happen. And the natural instinct of peasants is to blame the royalty and the nobility.
Sure.
There's even start to be uprisings.
Sure.
And the church, also a huge political power at the time, and the nobility need a scapegoat. The traditional scapegoat, because for up until 14th century-ish, the Catholic Church went back and forth, but a lot of times they actually said that witches weren't real. Like no human had this power. That was something only God could do. But because the traditional power of witches is to control the weather, they became a scapegoat for all the climate changes. It's not the only reason for it, but it is one of them.
Right. But also you have a lot of issues with patriarchal societies where they did not want women to share power, and knowledge is power. So women who were able to solve problems without men, who were able to do cures based on old knowledge shared, which Wicca, old knowledge. There are so many reasons that there was the persecution of women, and it was easier for the ignorant masses to get behind that persecution if they blame the woman for being the cause of sickness, crop failure, animal deaths, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Which is why specifically they targeted women.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
although
men have a lot to answer for it.
Oh yeah, I'm not defending it. Although I'll say
the two interesting things,
they got better. The two interesting things I find there is one, that a very common target, particularly in Protestant countries, were former nuns. Because when the Catholic Church gets kicked out of a country, formally, the convents get shut down, and the nuns, they're too old to get married. They don't have any land. They don't have any money. What are they going to do? Well, nuns historically were often midwives. They often had a little bit of herbalist and medical knowledge.
Sure.
So they became local wise women. So the Protestant, she's a former Catholic, strike one. She's doing weird medical things because she knows about herbs and midwifery, strike two. And she's a woman living on the outskirts of town, strike three. She's a witch.
Right, and they're going to her rather than going to the local priest.
Exactly.
Sure.
And then the other thing you find that's quite interesting is in Russia and Scandinavia, almost all throughout the world, almost everyone the majority of people accused of witchcraft are women. In Russia and Scandinavia, for cultural reasons, most of the people accused were actually men.
Oh, I suppose that's a move toward equal rights, but not the right move.
Oh, yeah, it's like it's a cultural, and even that it still winds up being kind of misogynistic, because the reason why it was almost always men is because they didn't believe that women could do magic. So it's kind of
just a different expression of the patriarchy,
but it's still misogynistic.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a Monty Python skit. They would have had fun with that one.
They would have.
But that's one of the things I do love about science, about the folklore. And this is something my grandmother encouraged me is to always find out what the science had to say, and then decide, whether that's the most rational answer. The sudden onset death syndrome, the night paralysis, sleep paralysis, some of the transcripts of werewolf trials in France and Germany and Italy and places. You read those, people didn't even actually turn into wolves so much as they acted bestial, cunning, and so on. And if you read the transcript, serial killers, they just didn't have a phrase for that at the time.
Yeah, I've made that argument that werewolf was basically just the earlier form of serial killer or mass murderer.
And also, it's interesting to see what pop culture has done with that, because the earliest werewolves were people who turned into wolves, not wolf men. They turned into wolves, which means they could be killed any way that a wolf could be killed. Storytellers needed that monster to be harder to kill and scarier than basically a dog-like creature. So they made him the man wolf, the upright creature who couldn't be killed as easily. And they added silver to the mix and all sorts of other things.
Yeah, mostly Kurt Siodmak doing the Wolfman.
Yep.
Again, they had an idea, like they thought about originally doing where he would just turn into a regular wolf, but it was cost prohibitive and it was considered more awkward to try to film a real wolf running around doing what they wanted to try to get it to do.
Yeah, and getting a wolf.
The decision was made; it would be more interesting to have a guy that turns into a wolf man.
Yep. And
I
like that they did that, because it created a horror genre that I particularly love. The Wolfman, the Werewolf of London, and all the other things, all the different interpretations, all the way up to my very favorite werewolf film, Dog Soldiers, which I
need to watch that.
That's a good one. It's not my favorite, but it's a good one.
It's my favorite by a mile. I mean,
really,
much like American Werewolf, The Wolf and Ginger Snaps, and a few others, Dog Soldiers is way up here because it's a well-written ensemble character drama. Ensemble character stories are what I write for the most part. And the dialogue was fantastic. It had humor as well as scares, nice twist to it. And almost every actor in it is one of my favorite character actors.
Nice.
Yeah,
I
can't disagree with you that it's a great movie. I think my favorite though werewolf movie still remains American Werewolf in London.
And it's certainly top 5 for me, along with Wolfen, Ginger Snaps, and Curse the Werewolf with Oliver Reed.
Oh God, yeah.
Based on
I think the werewolf like Wolfen as much, but yeah.
Not Wolfen. I'm sorry, The Howling.
The Howling. Okay,
The Howling.
That one's another great movie.
Wolfen was technically not a werewolf film. It was about mutant wolves, and the book was excellent.
The book was excellent.
The movie wasn't bad. But The Howling was fun. It was it was one of the better adaptations of one of the 70s horror novels, Gary Brander's novel.
Yeah, it's actually a better movie than it is a book.
Yeah, and the book was good, but the movie was superb. And
I didn't know it was a book. I've seen the movie.
Yeah, Gary Brander,
there were actually 3 Howling novels that Gary Brander wrote. I read all 3 of them, but none of them are. They're okay. Like the original Howling is interesting, but the movie took that idea and just took it another couple steps and made it really cool.
Yeah, it's a good example of somebody who had a great idea but wasn't the writer to write it to its best.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't take it as far as it could have gone.
Yeah.
I like werewolf movies, I have to be honest, but I'm trying to get over this particular mental prejudice I have. As a folklore buff, werewolf movies just kind of annoy me partly for how much of the folklore they ignore or remake, but which is partly that, and also partly I think you could make a genuinely interesting werewolf movie closer to the folklore because it would change what people expect.
Yeah, and that would be great. And Hollywood hasn't done that any more than they've done with vampires, because the vampire movies, I mean, they're so far away from the folklore.
True.
Couple quick examples. Most people think Dracula was staked. Dracula was killed with a Bowie knife and a kukri knife. He was stabbed to death at the end of the movie. Dracula walked around in sunlight. The whole thing about vampires being killed by sunlight was created when F.W. Murnau ran out of budget to film the big ending he had. Most of the crew had split. The lighting guy said, look, we've been shooting the vampire in darkness. Why don't we make it that he can't abide the light? The woman will lure him in, seduce him, kind of reverse seduction on the vampire. Sun will rise and kill him. And the director's like, sure, fine, whatever, let's shoot it. And from then on, sunlight. The stake. Stake was never used to kill a vampire, ever, ever, ever in folklore. Stake was used to hold the vampire down, usually through its stomach, while the ritual of exorcism was performed, cutting the head off, stuffing the mouth with garlic, etc. Different variations, different cultures. Mm-hmm. But it became a quick way to get rid of the vampire in movies. And the cross was never used to kill a vampire. In fact, a lot of vampire species, especially through Western and Central Europe, would go to church. They would live normal lives, but be vampires. Yeah. There are so many different types of vampires out in world culture. I've written a number of nonfiction books about this. Very few of them resemble, it's weirdly, the one that resembles in some qualities, not all, the Hollywood version of the vampire is the Jiangxia of China. Afraid of sunlight. That one is afraid of sunlight. And, a couple other things. But, and they underplay
as obsessive compulsive disorder to count grains of rice.
Weirdly, that's in countries all over the world. This OCD thing for vampires. But one of the Rosenbach Museum, which is in Philadelphia.
We've been there, in fact.
Yeah. So they have all of Brahm Stoker's research notes in one room. And I used to lecture there every year on Halloween. And then my buddy Dacre Stoker, the grandnephew of Brahm Stoker, has done.
We've had him on.
He's been a
good man. He's a good guy. He's a real good guy, good friend. But the thing with Dracula, and Dracula set the trend for vampires to follow. By the time Dracula got to England, after establishing how powerful he was in Transylvania, he would have just killed everyone. He would have turned the novel into a pamphlet. So, Stoker had to limit the vampire's powers. He gave Van Helsing the Eucharist and other things to drive it, to hold it at bay. And he'd come up with the idea that a vampire can't enter a house unless invited. Otherwise, he would have killed everyone the first night he was in England. But he couldn't because he was limited. Vetted by a writer, as a lot of these things are, in order to stretch the story out, give it more drama, more suspense. But people, see the movies and read the books. They read the novels and they see the movies much more than they read the folklore. And as a result, they think the novels and the movies are representational of folklore, and they're not. And that's what opens the door for the next generation of writers, whether they be writing about werewolves, vampires, or whatever, to go back to the folklore, something I've been yelling about for years. Go back to the folklore, get the original monsters. They're much scarier. They're much weirder. Yeah. My first three novels, which were, vampire trilogy, none of the vampires resembled the Hollywood version. So there was a kind of a high attrition rate of people trying to figure out how to survive against a vampire attack when all they know about vampires came from books and movies. Oops.
Which just makes me think, one of a funny story I've told Brian before, I think I mentioned it on the show. A friend of mine who actually did believe in real vampires. I'm complicated on the subject. I believe in things like vampires. I just don't think they were terribly physical creatures. I think it's a type of spirit.
Mm-hmm. Plenty of those.
Yep. But a friend of mine who believed in actual physical vampires claimed that all the stories of vampires counting seeds and things of that are actually stories of a single vampire who traveled a great deal and had obsessive compulsive disorder.
Would make a fun story to do that. It's a little unlikely considering the distances and frequencies of those beliefs, but it would make a hell of a fun story.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you have a little bit of playroom in the fact vampires as immortals, so he's got the time to walk, but it still gets a little improbable.
And that's as a professional writer of fiction, it delights me that taking these monsters, and even if you take kind of the Hollywood version and just do variations on it, most of these monsters are infinitely malleable. You can tell so many different stories about the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I love that potential, but I still think, and this is something I've had discussions with my buddy Mike Mignola, who does Hellboy. Hellboy, was the monsters he fought were folkloric monsters. I mean, if you read the original Hellboy comics, they were all monsters out of folklore. and people didn't recognize them because they don't read the folklore. I mean,
I
probably
didn't-
the only monster he wrote about that the average person would have recognized was Baba Yaga from Russia. But most of them, people are like, "Oh, that's a weird monster," and he's like, "Read
I
the
need to
folklore."
comment real quick.
Sure.
The thing we're using to live stream stops live streaming after 1 hour.
Yeah.
I can start another live stream. It's just a question of how much time you have.
I have another half hour.
Okay, then yeah, I'll wind up doing that. It hasn't stopped yet, even though we're over the hour mark. So we'll
Okay,
just
cool.
roll with it, folks. If we cut out real quick, I'll start another stream. Jonathan's kind enough to give us another half hour. I'm happy to take it. I'm still absolutely loving this conversation.
We just have to be careful not to cross the streams.
Yes.
Although I have to,
Good.
I was going to say, I want to comment briefly because I'm a huge fan of the game, and it's the one thing of yours I have in fact read when I was looking through your various books. So, can you say anything about writing for Deadlands?
So